What is up, MFers? Today I got a video for you guys. If you are struggling to catch bass on big swim baits, or you've just been too overwhelmed to get into it altogether, I am going to tell you about the 5 biggest mistakes I see swim bait anglers make, whether they're a newbie, they're an expert, or anything in between. I see these mistakes on a daily basis, and I know because I've made these mistakes myself, and the more that I fish with new people, the more I realize these little tiny details are the reasons that they're getting followers, or they're just not getting any feedback when they should be catching fish and should be catching giant fish. So as you guys know, I got a lot of swim baits. This is such a small fraction of what I have for swim baits. This is a couple of the boxes I carry in my boat. I carry everything from this little itty bitty chopper style bait right here to some of these guys like this 16-inch 1-pound glide bait right here, and everything in between. I think even though swim baits have been brought to the mainstream more than ever as we go into 2025, they are still probably the biggest unknown misconception genre of baits or techniques that exists in the bass fishing market. So like I said, I'm going to give you the 5 biggest mistakes I see anglers make, and stay tuned to the last one. Number 5 is probably going to be the biggest mistake that's going to get more giant fish in the boat for you. So the first mistake I see anglers make is before they even get into swim bait fishing, and that is they are overwhelmed by the size of the bait that they are going to be throwing. And I can understand that. You can be overwhelmed by the price of some of these baits is crazy. They might look giant and unnatural, and like, how are you ever going to get a bass to even eat this bait? So it's hard to stick with it. But guys, why are we okay, and why is it normal to throw a giant deep diving crankbait, right? Or to throw a giant creature bait or a 10-inch worm, something like that, or a jerk bait. But you're scared to throw something that's this size right here. It is not that much different of bait. You don't have to get into swimbait fishing with giant swimbait rods. I've got rods, again, that can handle a 1-pound bait. You do not need to go out and purchase that to get into swimbait fishing. Baits like the 6th Sense Flow Glider, like the smaller size Draw, the smaller S-Waver, the Shine Glide. These are all baits that can get you into swimbait fishing that don't cost $400, and they're not going to require you to go out and buy an exclusive swimbait rod for these techniques. Getting started with swimbait fishing, I think, is more mental than anything, and so it's very, very important to correlate different techniques that you're currently using with these new baits that you're going to be trying out. I tell people in the seminars that I give, and just giving people advice all the time, I tell them that if you're catching fish on a jerk bait, these smaller choppy style glide baits will fish in extremely similar areas very, very effectively, whether that be standing timber, whether that be, a wind-blown bank, a jetty, anywhere that you would be fishing a jerk bait. These smaller chopping style glides are excellent. Now, if you're going to be bumping it up, you're going to be fishing a crankbait, something like a medium diving crankbait, and that's something that you have a lot of confidence in, or your body of water, that's what you're used to fishing, then these crankdown style swim baits are absolutely money. They got a bill, you can just grind them in that rock, stop and go retrieve, just a straight retrieve, however you want to fish them. They fish extremely similar to a crankbait, and as you guys can see, it's not a terribly bigger bait. It almost weighs the exact same, actually, as this deep diving crankbait. Mistake number 2. This one is going to be for the guys that are getting a little bit more serious into swimbait fishing, and that is they are ill-prepared with the tackle they are using to target these fish. Keep in mind, guys, if you are going out throwing a $600 swimbait like this guy right here, something that natural, you've spent so much time and money on your setup, getting to the lake, all the time you've put in to catch those fish, do not skimp on the small things, the terminal tackle, the split rings, the hooks, and the line. These are absolutely freaking critical. Do not go out with 12 or 15 pound test to try out your new even $50 bait. You're going to get your heart broken. I know a lot of guys like to use braid, thicker braid on your swim baits. That can be fine. I got into it fishing with braid, but there is a much bigger, much higher risk that you are going to zing pow with braid. For those of you guys that don't know what that is, basically you're going to get a backlash, and it's much less forgiving to a big, heavy 4, 6, 10-ounce bait than a fluorocarbon would be. So I always am using as big a fluorocarbon as I can about use. 25-pound gamma generally for big swim baits like this. And your hook is very, very important. Some baits come with decent stock hooks. Some baits not so much. I would inspire you to take a look at whatever hooks are coming on these stock baits. Do not go out and fish baits with some lighter, flimsier style hooks. There's almost no benefit that I've found. If you're using a heavy enough rod and heavy enough line, there's almost no benefit to having lighter, stickier hooks, because all the weight of this big bait, all the force that fish is going to come up and pop that bait with or slash at that bait with, and all the heavy rod, the taper that's required for you to throw a bait that weighs 2, 4, 6, 10 ounces, you lose the benefits of that sticky, sharp hook, and instead it's going to flex the tip of that hook and open up the gap, as opposed to something like this hook, which is my favorite hook for the most part for almost every big bait. This is that Ryugi Pierce Brutal hook. Good luck flexing the tip on that one. And this isn't a damn saltwater ocean hook right here. It's just not gonna flex. It's gonna pierce that fish and keep them pinned. Very, very good hook. So take some advice I got from one of the best big bait experts of all time, Oliver Nye, when I was out fishing with him in California 7, 8 years ago. And that is, if you're throwing a bait that's like this, you better have all the terminal tackle, all of your rod, reel, line set up, ready to catch the biggest fish in that body of water, because you might only get one of those bites in your entire life. The third mistake I see anglers make when using swim baits is they are not using a big enough bait. Yeah, that's a little bit different than what I just told you guys, as far as, you know, you don't need to go out and pick up a 10-inch, a 12-inch, a 16-inch glide bait to get started. That is absolutely true. But the more you fish these things, the more you will realize that the power in this bait right here, the glide bait, the big swim bait, is that it's big. It's its draw power. And I can't tell you guys how many times I will be throwing a 6, 7, 8-inch bait, and the fish will either be just following it, they won't be interested in it at all, or they'll just be slapping at it and not fully committing to the bait. And then I bump up the size of the bait, and all of a sudden it's like a light switch went off. I promise you guys, this is not that big of a bait for a fish to eat. Is it a heavy, cumbersome, just takes a job of a bait to fish? This one right here? Yes, absolutely. It's cumbersome. It's a 15-inch bait. But I swear to you guys, 3 and 4 pound bass eat gizzard shad this size all the time. And of course, bigger fish, 7+ pounders, it's almost their entire diet for the most part down here in some of these Texas lakes, these southern lakes that have big gizzard shad in them. And I think that's just a negative cue to fish a lot of times when they're throwing this. And that's a pressure thing too. When guys are throwing a bait this size, they get used to seeing them, they get conditioned. When they're actually eating bait fish that are, twice the size of this bait right here, they're just not interested in it for whatever reason. Another scenario where I've seen that is in highland reservoirs. With clean water, for whatever reason, a lot of times, if you upsize your bait, you can go from nothing, not getting any commits, to all of a sudden with a 10 or 12-inch bait, you are going to start catching fish and catching tournament quality, tournament winning fish, and have the opportunity at the biggest fish in your lake. So do not be afraid to upsize. Even if you're on a decent bite, you can change the quality of your fish, and you can change the number of bites you're getting altogether just by simply using a 2, 3, 4-inch bigger bait. Trust me, it can make a huge difference. Mistake number 4 I see guys make is back to the mindset thing. They get discouraged when you get followers. We've all had this happen, whether you're looking at them with your eyeballs, whether you're looking at them on forward-facing sonar, a fish comes out behind a piece of cover, a dock, whatever it may be, follows your bait, follows it, and they just don't commit. The first time that happens, you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. That was awesome to see how he was reacting, and it gets you a little excited. And then it happens again, and then it happens again, and again, and again, and again. And all of a sudden, you're like, I just need to go back to throwing a damn Senko, because I'm never going to catch a fish on one of these big baits. You got to get that out of your head. You got to realize, when I go out fishing with these big baits, even baits, 10 inches in size, I am never fishing for one bite a day or I'm trying to catch the biggest fish in the lake, but you can get a lot of bites with big 10+ inch baits. I think that mindset of like fishing for one bite is gone. What you need to start thinking about is, what can I change? What adjustments do I need to make? Because if you didn't have forward-facing sonar, or if you couldn't see them visually, you got to think about the days when you are catching them good, when you are getting a lot of bites, you're probably having a lot of followers those days too. But the same thing also goes for any other technique. How many fish are seeing your crankbait, your jerkbait, your creature bait, your flipping bait, your jig that aren't committing to those? You just don't ever hardly see them, especially with baits on the bottom or up next to really tight cover. So what I'm saying is you need to understand when you're throwing a bait like this with this kind of draw power, it's literally going to draw every decent size and even small fish within 10 or 15 feet a lot of times up to your bait. That's a good thing and a bad thing. Don't let that discourage you. Instead, what I like to do is mental notes. So if a fish, you know, a giant fish, a predatory fish, the biggest fish in your body of water, or even if you're fishing a lake where maybe, you know, there's a couple double digits or a couple 6-7 pounders, whatever the biggest or close to the biggest size class fish is in your lake, whenever you come up to a piece of cover, you fish it, you pull it out with your glide bait, that fish is going to come out and follow and not bite, right? You got to take mental note of how that fish set up, because a fish that size and that caliber, sure, fish do move around quite a bit, but they will stay in a zone. And generally, the biggest fish in your body of water is going to stay on the most prominent feeding platform, feeding feature, whether that be the most isolated brush pile, whether that be, you know, a piece of cover, whether it's brush or a stump or a dock that's small enough to where they can be the only alpha in that area. They're going to want to stay in that zone. So what I like to do is, you know, I think about, you know, what were the cues that fish gave me to why they didn't bite? Were they really hot on the bait and they just didn't get it? If that's the case, it might be worth throwing a different bait right back in there, you know, go 10, 15 feet down the bank, further turn around, fire a cast with a different bait. If he was almost ready to go, it just needed a little bit different presentation. Was it a fish that kind of came up sluggish, was kind of looking at it, wasn't necessarily tracking that glide bait back and forth, but was there? You know, that's something where the fish is definitely not in the mood to bite, and that's probably a timing issue or a bait issue, but probably a timing issue. And so take mental note of that spot, come back to it, and most importantly, I would fish it from a different angle. You know, people are always asking me, why am I getting so many follows and what do I do about it? That's my biggest thing is if I come back to a spot where I've had a big one follow my bait, hot, cold, however it may be, I'm coming back to that spot and I'm fishing it. In my head, I'm thinking about the angle that fish has probably never seen a bait. Of course, you can think about how a bait fish would approach that area, but with all the pressure these days, I'm generally thinking about what angle can I throw at that fish to where he's not used to seeing it, whether that be fishing uphill on a point, whether that be, you know, getting right, if you're fishing a dock, get right up tight against the bank, throw out to the front of the dock and work it back. Just making different presentations and different angles can be what it takes to get that fish to bite. But most of all, keep in mind the timing. Come back later in the day. Sun angle's different. Shade angles are different. If it gets cloudy, if it starts raining, if it stops raining, something different's needed to make that fish to bite. But at the same time, don't beat yourself up if that fish still won't bite. On to the next one. And so tying into that a little bit, let's go to the last and most important number 5 mistake that I see anglers of all different skill levels with swim baits make, and that is when you get that fish to follow, whether that be on forward-facing sonar or if you see it visually, they freeze up, they get excited, they squeeze their rod tight, and then their bait was doing this the whole way back, and then it goes like this. And that fish is like, and then they taper off. Do not stop or slow down your bait when there is a fish on it. That almost never works. Instead, pick up the pace. If you're working a bait, you know, just a normal, you know, like crank, 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 wider glide, I always just as soon as that fish is engaged with it, I am going to gradually increase the pace of that bait. And a lot of times, you know, if that perks the fish's interest even more, I'll speed it up even a little bit more, mix in some harder jerks, snaps, twitches, because that fish is almost ready to bite. But it seems like so many people that message me with questions, or they talk to me in person, or I'm on the boat with them and I watch them throw baits, you know, they're just kind of working it through the glide and the fish comes up to it and all of a sudden they just want to look at the fish, or they want to look out on the screen, they want to look out in the water, and they lose focus on what is actually happening. Yeah, some of these baits are the most realistic baits that we've ever had and have ever thrown to these fish. But at the same time, this does not look anything like the real thing. It's hard, It's got hooks on it. It smells, it clacks together. It sounds, looks, smells nothing like a real fish. The better look you give a giant bass with big marble eyeballs the size of a quarter to look at a fake lure, the more chances you're going to have that it's going to not eat that fake lure. So as soon as you get them engaged, as soon as you get them closing the gap on your bait, or if they're freaking, following your bait side to side, I like to, don't freak out and twitch it really fast, but gradually increase, gradually increase. If that doesn't make them go, change up your snaps, your twitches, whether that be, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that to speed it up. And generally, that's going to be that triggering mechanism to get the biggest fish in the lake or any fish to eat this fake piece of resin right here. So in summary, guys, remember, you don't need to go out and buy something this big. You can get started with really, really small glide baits. Start to learn them before you start bumping up to the next size. And then think about the mental approach to get more fish, to actually commit to your bait using some of the tips that I just told you. Guys, it doesn't matter if you're throwing a 16-inch bait, a 4-inch glide bait, or anything in between. These things will always be effective. And there's times when the glide baits, these hard glides, will catch fish that no other technique will catch. So if you could, drop a comment right down below. Let me know which of these 5 mistakes you've maybe been making, or which one really struck home with you the most. And I'll catch you guys soon. I'm out of here. Peace.